What's up, everybody? Nick Dwyer back with you for the 10th inning, giving you another edition of This Day in Sports History. In yesterday's edition, we had a tied record in the NHL Stanley Cup Finals with 5 points scored by Jari Kurri. We don't have that today, but we do have some interesting stuff to get into. But before we do get into it, if you're new to the channel, subscribe if you like the content, leave a like on the video, it's free to do, helps out the channel. Now let's get into it. This day in sports history. In 1912, the AL president Ban Johnson tells the Detroit Tigers players if they continue to protest Ty Cobb's suspension, they will all be banned from baseball. Therefore, Ty Cobb kind of said, hey guys, it's not worth it. Go back to play. I'll do my time. Now, yesterday was the day the Tigers infamously lost 24-2 after, they just walked off the field and replacement players had to play. A day later, Ban Johnson threatens to ban all of the Tigers from baseball if they don't come back to play. So they came back to play. Ty Cobb's suspension ended 10 games later. Moving up to 1935, the NFL adopts an annual college draft to begin in 1936. Moving up to 1960, we have Juan Marichal. Now, Juan Marichal was one of the greatest pitchers in San Francisco Giants history. Well, in his debut, he showed the greatness right there. In his debut, they played the Philadelphia Phillies, and Marichal got the win, throwing a magnificent one-hitter to give the Giants a win, start of a miraculous career for the Giants. Then in 1962, we stick with baseball. Stan the Man Musial passes Honus Wagner for the most hits in the National League with 3,431. This hit came off lefty Ron Peranowski and was a line drive single into right field to give him that hit. Honus Wagner was one of the greatest ball players of all time. Doesn't matter that he played in the dead ball era. He was a great player all around, but Stan Musial, one of the greatest hitters, let alone contact hitters, of all time. Musial, only a couple people have passed him on the all-time hit list since then. Cobb was already there. But you have Pete Rose, Hank Aaron, the only people who have passed Musial since. 3 years after that, in 1965, West Ham United wins the 5th European Cup Winners' Cup against 1860 Munich of West Germany 2-0. Alan Seeley caps the game off for West Ham, scoring in the 70th and 72nd minute, even though they had chances earlier in the game. But after the 72nd minute, the game was over. Munich just couldn't rally back. West Ham ends up winning the 5th European Cup Winners' Cup. In 1968, you had the Tigers legend Al Kaline passing another Tigers legend, Hank Greenberg, with his 307th home run, surpassing Greenberg in the Detroit Tigers' all-time home run list. Kaline was since passed, but surpassing another legend in your own right is a great deal. In 1973, you had the greatest racehorse of all time. It doesn't matter what anyone else does, Secretariat will always be the greatest racehorse of all time. And in the 98th Preakness Stakes, Secretariat won in a record 1 minute and 53 seconds. Changed from 1 minute and 54 and 2/5 seconds, which was initially what it was ruled at because of a clock malfunction. However, in 2012, the time was changed to 1 minute and 53, giving Secretariat the fastest Preakness Stakes time ever. 1 year after that, in the Stanley Cup Final, the Philadelphia Flyers made their first ever NHL Stanley Cup appearance. They were going against the Boston Bruins, who made their 3rd appearance in the past 5 years, and the other 2 appearances, they won the Stanley Cup. So this was a great test for the Flyers. And well, the Flyers actually took it. They won Game 6, 1-0, giving them a 4-2 series win. And the Flyers were a 1967 expansion team. They were actually the first non-original 6th champion to win the Stanley Cup since 1935 when the Montreal Maroons won the Stanley Cup. Sticking with the Stanley Cup, in 1984, you had the Edmonton Oilers going up against the New York Islanders. And we had not one, but 2 people scoring 2 goals in Game 5. You had the great one, Wayne Gretzky, scoring 2 goals, assisting 1 goal, in the Game 5 victory, which they won 5-2 for a 4-1 series win and a Stanley Cup. But you also have Pat LaFontaine for the New York Islanders, scoring the only 2 goals of the game for them, making it at least a little bit closer, not a shutout. However, the Edmonton Oilers started their great dynasty of the 80s, and Wayne Gretzky added a championship to his already great career. but then he would go on to add a couple more. In 1991, Willie T. Ribbs became the first African-American driver to race in an Indianapolis 500. Now, Ribbs really made his name in Trans Am racing, but he did the first test race in 1985, then became the first driver to make the Indianapolis 500 in 1991. That's a pioneer right there. Willie T. Ribbs. In 1999, Lazio wins the 39th European Cup Winners' Cup, going up against Mallorca. Interestingly, this was Mallorca's first season in European play, and they made it all the way to the European Cup Winners' Cup. This Cinderella story just wasn't enough for them to pull off the victory, and Lazio ended up defeating Mallorca 2-1. Moving up to 2001, Manchester United loses 3-1 to Tottenham, but Manchester United still ended up winning the Premier League title for the third consecutive season, even with the loss. In 2007, you have Manchester United again going up against Chelsea in the FA Cup title. This time though, Manchester United wasn't as lucky. Chelsea ended up beating United 1-0 on a 116th minute game-winning goal by Drogba, giving Chelsea their fourth FA Cup title. In 2008, John Lester, a pitcher for the Boston Red Sox at the time, throws a no-hitter against the Kansas City Royals. Lester, 9 innings pitched, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts. Now this would have been worse for Lester had he not given up any walks, because the Red Sox gave up an error in the field. But since Lester did throw a couple walks, it doesn't hurt as much, because he wouldn't have gotten a perfect game, but if he didn't walk anybody, he had a chance. But that's not what happened. Still, Lester threw a no-hitter. In 2018, at the 142nd edition of the Preakness Stakes, Justify wins the Preakness Stakes for his second leg of a successful Triple Crown run, becoming the most recent Triple Crown winner in horse racing. Finally, in 2019, you have the PGA Championship, and you had the winner from last year in 2018, Brooks Koepka. Now, we've already named Brooks Koepka. Brooks Koepka, the first 2 rounds, was unbeatable in this tournament. The last round though, he struggled immensely. 5 bogeys on the last 8 holes, but he still ended up winning thanks to those first 2 rounds by 2 strokes ahead of world number 1, Dustin Johnson. So there you have it. That's what happened on this day in sports history. If I left anything out, let me know down in the comment section. What was the most interesting thing that happened in this day in sports history? For Nico Dwyer and the 10th inning, stay safe out there. See ya.